And we're going to start with a message from the governor of Colorado, Jared Polis.
I'm Governor Jared Polis. Welcome to the great state of Colorado for the 9th annual GlobalMindED conference, setting the standard for access and equity by connecting students to role models, mentors, internships, apprenticeships, experiences, and promotion pathway jobs. We're so delighted to bring the best talent in education, government, philanthropy, and business to the great state of Colorado to share what we're doing and learn from the national and global stage. GlobalMindED and Colorado share many common goals, two of which include free universal preschool, launching this fall here in Colorado, saving families about $6,000 a year, our climate goals, achieving renewable energy 100% by 2040, and much more. We know that the emerging leaders in this room will pave the way for innovation in these and other key areas, from health to housing, safety to mental health, even exploring Mars and building AI that closes equity gaps instead of widens them. Thank you for your inclusive leadership and for making this important collaborative equity work a priority. Enjoy the great state of Colorado.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce this incredible panel on a topic that I think no matter where you're from, there's people here from Miami, Chicago, Ohio, Kansas City, all over the place. And we have so many cities that are affected by homelessness, food insecurity issues, safety issues, environmental and health threats. And they're all very interconnected. So this is about solutions, it's about commitments, and it's about outcomes. And it's my pleasure to introduce somebody who's been a longtime leader in GlobalMindED. This is Vanecia Kerr. She's Chief Impact Officer at Mile High United Way. She also is a mentor to one of our students for the last several years at North Carolina A&T. And then Dr. Kimberly McClain, Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and she's first-gen rock star. And Alexander Walker-Griffin, Mayor of the city of Hercules, California. And Dr. Stacie Walton unfortunately got COVID, so she's not able to be with us. But also Cameron DeTello, who is from Rocky Mountain. She's Rocky Mountain Engagement Manager with the Young Invincibles, and she just gave a wonderful session up in the policy room with a bunch of incredible students. And Britta Fisher, President and CEO of Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. So join me in welcoming these incredible people from so many important perspectives on this key topic.
Can you hear me? Perfect, great. Well, good afternoon. It is so good to see all of you today. We have a very important conversation that we will have this afternoon, and what is exciting is that we have the right people in front of us to have this conversation. You heard a little bit about their background, and we're going to dig into a few questions that we have for them, and then certainly if we have some time, we'll open it up so that you can ask questions as well. I will say as we get started that I'm down one arm because of what people call the bionic arm that I have here. So if you see a little awkwardness happening here as I try to navigate, I'm asking you to give me a little grace ahead of time, because I have not done a whole lot of panel discussion since I fell and injured myself. So I am learning how to do things differently, even using my left hand. So I will say that, and we're going to get into the conversation, but I wanted to preface that just in case you're wondering, like, what is going on with her? Like, why is she? I don't want that to be a distraction, but I thought I'd put it out front first, and then we're going to jump into our conversation. So does that sound okay? All right, perfect. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into our conversation. Our topic today is around resolve to solve, because what we recognize is that there are a lot of pressing issues in our community. And what we often hear is, let's talk about some of these challenges, and then you hear some solutions, you don't hear some solutions. There's usually just a lot of conversation. I'm the type of person that I really like action. I really like to talk about how do we really get to the solutions that are going to make a difference. So I love this topic around resolve to solve, and of course we have many things that we need to solve within our communities. So as we start, I want to start by talking about homelessness, because it is arguably one of the most critical issues that we're facing in our community. We are seeing it in cities across the country, including in Denver. We see people in tents. You probably saw that if you're coming from out of town. But what we are also understanding is that that's not just something happening here in Denver. It is happening across the country with varying degrees of challenge related to it, and how many people are impacted by homelessness. And so what I want to ask our panel today, and I'm going to start with you, Britta. I know you have had over 20 years of really focusing on homelessness, but if you could tell us, like, what is one of the most impactful ways to resolve to solve homelessness?
Housing is the foundation to solutions to homelessness. Housing, housing, housing. And part of how we know that at the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless is that we were founded initially as a health clinic to serve people experiencing homelessness. But very quickly, our providers realized what they really wished they could prescribe was housing. That was what was needed for people to get healthy and stay healthy. And so the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless decided, let's figure it out. And so we not only secured housing, but also learned how to develop it. And it's a complex process. But it's also, quite simply the solution to homelessness, that if you are without housing, by getting housing, you are on your way. And certainly there are other individual complexities to address. But what if I told you that right now we have an evidence-based solution that would resolve homelessness for almost 80% of all the people that are experiencing homelessness in our streets, in our shelters, and that they would still be not experiencing homelessness 3 years later? Sounds pretty good, right? Well, we have that. That is why the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless has been nationally recognized for something called the Supportive Housing Social Impact Bond. And so what this is basically the city and county of Denver, and I'm just going to take a couple minutes because I think this is important, put together a list of everybody who was in the emergency rooms, in jails, in detox, and then controlled that for how many folks didn't have an address or had an address in a shelter. It was a long list, a couple thousand folks. And they looked in at the 250 highest utilizers of those services. And what they found was that on an individual basis, those emergency services costs that the city was paying for cost about $29,000 per person. It's about $7 million for just those 250 folks. So we're already spending the money. And how could we maybe spend it differently? And so the social impact bond said, let's put people in housing first. The method of putting people without precondition or requirement into housing and wrapping them with services. And we found remarkable results. So let me first remind you of what we had faced from just those 250 highest utilizers. They accounted for 1,500 arrests in a year, 14,000 days in jail in a year, 2,200 visits to detox, and 500 emergency room visits. So this social impact bond was evaluated by the Urban Institute. And when they looked at who got the immediate prescription, basically, of housing versus those who were in the control group and did not receive immediate housing, they again found tremendous results. When people are immediately housed, they had fewer interactions with criminal justice, decreased shelter usage, decreased use of the emergency room, and increased usage of office-based care. What that looks like by the numbers is days in shelter were down 35%, police contacts were down 35%, arrests down 40%, jail days down 27%, ER visits down 40%, and office-based care increased 155%. We also saw detox come down 65%. So when you look at that and you think about that, at least half of the costs of putting people into housing, building housing for them that was supportive housing with trauma-informed design, as well as some scattered site housing, that half of those costs were covered by the cost avoidance through this. That's pretty amazing. And then we also see, ancillary benefits, Medicaid savings of $5,800 per person. That's pretty substantial. And so when we look at those costs that we're already paying, and to know that we could have a much better human health, human bottom line while saving money, to me, I have to go with supportive housing, and that housing is the foundation to solutions to homelessness.
Great. Thank you. Dr. McClain.
Yes, ma'am.
When you hear that, like, what's happening on the federal level to help address homelessness?
Well, one of the things that we know is that we live in the greatest country in the world, and there is zero reason that anyone should find themselves unsheltered, homeless, or fighting against the system to have a place to go to. Everybody deserves that. And so that's the first thing at the federal level, is bringing that, not just awareness, like, yeah, conceptually I know that that's really what that means, it's the right thing to do, but can you feel it, can you touch it, do you realize that the person next to me, you may not realize that they may be living out of their car, going over to the YMCA or gas station, getting themselves cleaned up and coming into your office every day. The face of homelessness is our neighbor, and the minute that we at the federal and nationally realize that, the more impactful our programs are. One of the things that we know, and so some of you may have heard Secretary Fudge say it, and President Biden and Vice President Harris, our strident supporters, is ensuring that we find capacity and the ability to grow our affordable, livable, quality home stock, whether that is in multifamily housing, whether that is in single-family housing, and even thinking more creatively as we look at our cities. We know that land, especially on our coast, there's just not a lot of space available. So how do we think creatively about it? How do we look to say, how do we repurpose and revamp our warehouses to create affordable living, mixed income living in places that we would want to live in? But more importantly, how do we take the full resource capacity of the federal government, whether it's Department of the Interior looking at our green spaces, whether it's the U.S. Department of Agriculture and our urban agricultural construct, or whether it's Department of Housing and Urban Development, God bless you. How do we bring those resources together so that we have the full capacity of the government to create affordable communities that we all want to live in, we all want to be able to have? Grocery stores, Starbucks, if you have Starbucks, if you like Starbucks. But we all want those things in our communities. So those are the things nationally that we're looking at. I know President Biden in his budget, we have asked for a substantial amount in terms of our FY24 budget. As everyone's heard, there's been a lot of back and forth. We heard the negotiations around the debt ceiling, and one of the biggest questions that I got over the course of the last couple of weeks was, well, what does that mean? How's that going to affect us from a housing perspective? Are we going to lose some of the programs? Are we going to lose some of that? One of the things that the President continues to fight for, and Secretary Fudge and myself continue to fight for, is to ensure that the budget that we asked for, that we can actually keep it, and we may not be able to grow it. And I'll be the first one to tell you, it's tough. We may be flat, and that's what everybody heard, but that's way better than taking the cuts. So that's kind of what you're seeing on the national landscape. We are very optimistic as we continue to go into the summer that we won't see major impacts to the people that we live with and serve in our communities.
Thank you. I'm gonna actually go to our mayor over here, as I want to hear the city perspective on what's happening within your city in terms of homelessness and how we resolve to solve that. We talked about housing, right? Which obviously that makes a lot of sense, and it sounds like we have some really impactful ideas that are already kind of happening. What's happening in Hercules related to homelessness? Are you seeing the same kinds of things in your city? And what are really like some of the ways that you're looking at resolving that?
Yes, and thank you for the question, and good afternoon, everybody. Most people have never heard of Hercules, California. I can assure you, if you've been to the Bay Area, you probably drove through it. We're in the best location in the East Bay, 20 minutes away from San Francisco, 20 minutes away from Napa. And because of our location, we have our fair share of unhoused individuals moving in and about our communities. And primarily, it's not people who are looking for long-term shelter, it's people who are in the transit. They're moving from place to place. Hercules kind of sits in a little awkward position in the Bay Area. We're just outside the lines for our subway system, so the only real way to get in and out of the city is through buses. And so the folks that we do encounter, whether it's someone calling it into our city office, or maybe it's the police department who interact with someone, from there we work with our county and the state partners to make sure that we can get that person the resources that they actually need. Because more often than not, you'll find somebody, and I've seen this multiple times, that I don't want to say on their last legs, but potentially could be in a really bad situation if you didn't contact them maybe a day or two prior, or even just a couple of days down the road. So a lot of us cities are working together to make sure that we talk to Sacramento, we talk to our stakeholders, not only at the state but the federal level, for resources, because the typical problem we encounter on the city level is we will run out of resources. My city is 26,000 people. I don't have the same resources as our neighbors in San Francisco or San Jose that even have whole departments who address some of these issues. So we got to get real creative, and one of the ways is doing that is establishing a hotline system that we have in the county, where if we know something that comes up, we call the county, we get this person out here, and now this person is not only known to our city but in the county as well, so that way this person doesn't fall between the cracks. And unfortunately, more often than not, you tend to hear about people reoccurring, and usually it's the cause of their own death, say during the winter or the summer. So that's what we're kind of focusing on here at the local level.
Great, thank you so much. You can pass it to Carmen, because what I'd love to hear is, I know you're with Young Invincibles and you work a lot with youth and young adults. Is this a conversation that's happening with our youth and young adults and this next generation that's coming up? Are they coming up with ideas, or what's happening related to homelessness in terms of solutions?
Yes. Young people are really struggling with housing, unfortunately, and I think one of the most frustrating things for young people to hear is when other generations are like, I worked a part-time job and went to school and did just fine. I don't understand what you're doing with your money. You need to have some kind of financial security training or something, and that's not the case. We all know that the cost of living is just skyrocketing, and our income levels are not keeping up with that. And we have young people constantly telling us what their needs are, and not everyone listens. They need housing. When I looked at that question, it was like, that's the solution, housing. And they do have other solutions, but I think one of the things I've been hearing and that we've been hearing across the country is there are a lot of great programs and resources and things that their communities are offering. It's just sometimes hard to seek them out or to find them. If you're unhoused, you're usually facing a lot of other different issues as well. You might not have access to the internet, to a telephone, to a computer, a social worker, whatever that might be. So they're not hearing about these different resources. They are just trying to find the next place to stay at that's going to keep them warm for the night and put food in their belly. So what we're trying to do is let people know that you need to reach out to the people that are actually affected by the issue and hear what their issues are and have a coordinated community approach with it. I think young people are noticing that we're treating this as we're approaching it like we need to have a solution that is individualized when we need to have a community approach because it's a systematic issue. And young people are really trying to get others to vote for measures that are going to support housing, to look into policies that are going to make a large systematic change. And sometimes that's hard when our state budgets are limited, our local budgets are limited, but we have to really keep pushing for these different solutions because it's just not working out for the unhoused people, and it's getting worse, and it's leading to other issues like behavioral health issues, food insecurity, whatever that might be. And unfortunately, it's when you work in a policy and advocacy space, it's difficult when you talk to these young people and you can't provide those direct services, but that's why I think it's our responsibility to have that community approach and ensure that organizations are working with their local offices, with organizations like Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, and really staying connected with one another.
I appreciate that, thank you, because what we're hearing, of course, is like housing, right? It's something that we probably all know, that if people are unhoused, that if they had housing, then that can certainly help to alleviate some of the challenges that we're seeing within our community. But one of the things that I also kind of think about is the fact that, I spent over 20 years in the corporate sector before transitioning to the nonprofit sector. And when I transitioned to the nonprofit sector, I started working in education with education-based nonprofits. And one of the things that I quickly learned is that there are a lot of great solutions out there related to education and also related to a lot of the issues that we're talking about today, because I also realized that there's some really smart people who are working on these issues. But for whatever reason, we have that challenge of getting from what we know works to actually implementing that on a broader scale. There is a disconnect that happens there. So, for any of you that would like to answer that question, like how do we get from what Britta was talking about, what we're hearing across the panel is like we have some of these solutions, but how do we get from this place of understanding what the solutions are and actually implementing them on a broader scale to truly address what we're seeing in terms of housing?
The good news is that we can make different decisions. The bad news is that we made decisions that got us exactly where we are. And there are systems that have disparities baked in. And we have to make decisions that are hard about when to dismantle existing systems to make them more equitable and have a better future for everyone, and where we have to work with what we've got and make up the difference with money. And I think that's one of the things that I don't hear enough conversation about, is that we're already spending a lot of money. We spend a lot of money to build new jails and do different things that are very expensive, emergency care versus office-based care. But what if we let people have access to health care, to housing? What if that was seen as a human right? What if you could get those things that you need when you're in a crisis and need that kind of support? And we have not made those decisions. I think we have an ethos where we don't want to see people starve. We don't want to see people houseless. We don't want to see those impacts. But we do have to make different decisions with the resources that we have. And so it comes back to, how do we model the community that we want? How do we elect the people that see these problems for what they are? We just had a Denver election that was runoff decided on Tuesday. And, you know, just put in context for a moment that for the young person who's getting lectured about their part-time job and not being able to make their housing payments, that in the last decade in Denver, the cost of housing has gone up $94 a day. Every day for the last decade. Their incomes are not going up by that amount, right? Nobody's income's going up by that percentage increase. It's been an incredible crush to see housing costs go up at that scale. And so, you know, one of the talking points in this election was, well, with $78 million, we can create 25,000 units of housing. Okay, that's $2,880 per house. Exactly how does that work? Like, there are the right ideas, there are the right solutions, but we have to be realistic about what it costs and about how we can get there together.
Great, thank you. Yes, please jump right in. Our mayor.
All right, I didn't say I was tech savvy. But you know, I think really what it comes down to is the people who are making the decisions, right? And as a mayor, there's this organization called the National League of Cities, and every city has their own, or every state has their own League of Cities. And I will tell you, when I tell people I'm from California, they think the beacon of progressive, innovative ideas. It really is, until you start talking about some of these issues when it comes to housing. And so it really comes down to the people that you want to elect. Do you want someone who's, for lack of a better term, is going to screw over the next generation by saying, oh, we don't want to change the characteristics of our neighborhood, or, you know, we don't want to add that to it. Well, let's just do that to them. So for a little bit of a clarification, I'm 25 and I'm a part of Generation Z. And I always joke around this, but I'm kind of serious at the same time. We're the generation that gets nothing but bad news. One of the biggest fights I constantly have with my colleagues is when we have this definition of affordable, everyone thinks that it's going to be people ripping and riding, it's just going to be shootings, this, that, and the third. But it's helping out single mothers, it's helping out single fathers. And I think we've come to learn over the past couple of years, and I think the pandemic has really perpetrated it, that it's easier and more affordable to give people the resources that they need so they can be independent, rather than them just giving them this kind of like government crutch of prison and all these other services that ultimately are not benefiting them into their ultimate success. So I think, again, it comes down to the policymakers, but then that's where we have to tap into our state and federal partners to issue mandates. One thing that our Governor Newsom, has been really good at and really on recently has been having these mandates for us. If you're not working to build housing, you're not going to get X, Y, and Z. Because I'll tell you, when I talk to some of these other cities, they wouldn't move if they didn't have to. They wouldn't add any new housing. They wouldn't do anything if they didn't have to. Because why? They want to keep the charm of their neighborhood. But we all know what that means. It's keeping out people who look like me, or simply just keeping out your grandchildren. Again, I'm 25, so when I talk to some of my colleagues who are a little bit older than me, I say to them, I say, hey, you're blocking out your grandchildren. You're blocking out that next generation. I don't know how you can go to bed at night not being comfortable with having the idea that your grandchild can do the exact same thing as me. So I think it's a moral compass thing, and that's only going to come down to the people who are actually behind the dais and in these offices.
Thank you.
Absolutely, and that was one of the things that if I could impart anything on to anyone, elections have consequences and they matter. I don't care whether it is your city council, I don't care whether it's your school board, whether it's the person who's going to be your member at large. Those are the individuals that impact your lives, our lives, every single day. At the most personal local level, I look and I ask the question, well, why do I have what I deem as substandard grocery stores? Why do I not have a Whole Foods? Why do I not have a Mom's? Just naming a couple. Why do I have to go to another county? And the answer is because the location that I live in is predominantly Black and brown people. So one of the things that I would encourage everyone to do is use your voice. If your policymakers, even at the very basic local level, are not doing things to improve your lives, are writing policies, passing laws that are not benefiting you, that are not benefiting your community, use your voice. I don't care what political persuasion they are, if they are not taking care of you and your needs and serving your community, then they do not need a place, they don't need a seat at the table. Because I will tell you that the whole concept of work another job, been there, done that, and it's still not getting our generation to where they need to be. And there's no reason to have 7 people stacked in a 3-bedroom apartment just so that you can have a decent place to live at a rate that you can afford. So if you just take a look at that, in DC for a 900 square foot apartment that is at the transportation line, near a grocery store and some other amenities, that is $3,000 a month. I cannot afford $3,000 a month, and let alone my brand new college graduate self being $3,000 a month. So use your voice, because our officials need to know that affordable housing is what we need. And if they're not doing it and they're passing laws that do not support it, they're having zoning policies that do not support it, let them know how you feel. That's the only way that we're going to have a community in a world that serves everyone.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So we have a couple of other challenges that we want to also talk about during our time together. I would say that food insecurity and health are likely connected. And what we know, there's lots of data that's out there right now, is that there are too many communities in our country who do not have a grocery store nearby. And you started to talk about that, Dr. McClain. And they do not have near them fresh food. If they do have some kind of store, it's the corner store that may not have fresh food. And fresh food is just so far away, and if they're not near a bus line, that also creates challenges. What we know is that when people are not eating properly, it can also lead to health challenges. And they can be pretty significant in terms of high cholesterol and diabetes and high blood pressure. And what we also know is that that is also connected to people of color are disproportionately affected by the food insecurity, by the health risk. So my question is, how can we create a more equitable and sustainable food system within our country? I know you started to talk about, elected officials, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about, are we coming down to who we elected, or are there other things that we should be considering when we start to think about how do we solve this food insecurity issue within our communities?
Wow, it's a tough question, because I think one part of it is who we elect. And I'll go back to the local level. When we look at our executive county boards, so our county executive boards, quite often they are the ones that determine what the master plan is for that county. If that master plan of the county only benefits a certain portion of the county, a certain demographic of the county, then that's a problem. One of the things that I see as I go across the United States, it doesn't matter whether it's the East Coast, the West Coast, or the South where I went to school, is that when you look at the master development plan, and they normally do that over an extended period of time, that master development plan over time it benefits communities that are not of color, or if it's not communities of color, they are the more wealthier communities in sections of a city. And so one of the things that I've heard from even developers is, well, they don't really have the right demographics to be able to support putting in a vegan store. They don't have the right demographics to be able to put in a Panera Bread. And so my question back is, well, tell me what those demographics are. Tell me what that looks like to you from a business perspective, because I absolutely get it. You don't want to build a store with a pure business, from a pure business perspective. You don't want to build a store or any sort of retail that's not going to be sustainable. But if your only measure is what the demographics of the area are, and not what is the disposable income of that area, what does the foot traffic look like, then that too becomes a problem. And so when you see these studies come out, especially when we're talking about retailers building, whether they're putting in grocery stores, whether they're putting in restaurants, be a part of those, because they do have those community forums in which you can ask the developer, well, let's talk about what you're going to put in. I attended one with the developer coming to my specific area, and the developer's initial solution, we're going to put in a Burger King. No, I'm sorry, I told the story. We're going to put in a McDonald's. We're going to put in a Taco Bell. We're going to put in Kentucky Fried Chicken. Nowhere did that sound like food from a health perspective that I would want myself to have, let alone the neighbors in my community. So I think that that's one piece of it. The other piece is working with the state and federal government to be able to build those green spaces that will allow for us to have farming in our communities, to be able to build community gardens. Because we all know that if you have a sense of ownership of what's going on in your community, you're going to take care of it, and you're going to have pride, and it doesn't matter how much you make, it doesn't matter what side of the tracks you come from, you're going to take care of that, and it doesn't even matter the way you look. So those are some of the things. Now there are other things that are completely going to be outside of those spaces and how can we attack it. But a lot of it then still goes back to who do we elect, who are making the policies, who are setting the standards for our communities.
Thank you. All right, so Carmen, I know you're with Young Invincibles. Tell me, is this something that, from your perspective, are you hearing this as the challenge, and what are coming up? What's coming up again, like as some of the solutions related to like this food insecurity and equity around food?
Young people are very passionate about solving social determinants of health. They have a great understanding about how fragmented our systems are, how they're not communicating with one another, and how difficult it is to navigate the systems. I want to share an example of some work we've been doing in Colorado that is pretty progressive, trying to just flip our whole healthcare system upside down. It's fine, it's just a little thing. But we've been working on this for a few years and been educating young people about what it means to understand social determinants of health, or even with students, sometimes we call it social determinants of student success. They're pretty much the same thing. But we've been pushing for a model that focuses on developing and requiring more collaborations across those different sectors. So think about your primary care provider, behavioral health, social services, any kind of resources offered by the government, ensuring that there's green space and food, and having we're calling them commons, but it's kind of just like a personal social worker that works with your family that is ensuring all of these different providers and resources are talking to one another. And what we're looking at is doing a study in Aurora, Colorado, which, if I'm not mistaken, is one of or the most diverse community in the state. And working with young families, so from birth until until they're 18, and working with their mothers or their guardians or whoever that might be to kind of see what the success of this looks like. It's just, because what we're hearing again is it's just so hard to navigate. They don't know where to start. People are giving them different mixed messages, and they get frustrated, and they just kind of give up sometimes. And they'll try again, and then they'll work with someone else, and it's unstable and it's unsafe. So I think that we need to continue to try to explore these really unique and progressive solutions to our systems and push for our elected officials to make the change and hold them accountable and elect young people in office, because they're probably going to be the ones to get the job done, are going to be the ones that are worrying about their generation and the generation that's after them, not just what's happening to them right there in a moment and what's going to make it easier for them in the next 5 or 10 years. Because unfortunately, I do think that there were generations before us that just weren't thinking about what it will look like for their kids and their grandkids and what the world will look like in 50 to 100 years. And now, not only are we trying to create new systems that will work better for those young people, but we do have to dismantle those old ones simultaneously, and it's exhausting. But that's why I think it's important to get young people involved, because they understand the issues, they understand what has to be done, and they have the energy to get it done. And during one of the other panels I had today, one of the young people was talking about how people are just saying, just wait, you're gonna get tired, you're gonna get used to the system. And it's messages like that that make it difficult for us to make change. We have to support one another, and we have to ensure that we're taking care of one another. And for all of the policy people, community organizers, if you're going to the voting booth, whatever it might be that you're doing to be civically engaged, remember to take care of yourself still, and to think about what your neighbor might need and what your parents might need and that next generation might need, but really push each other to get involved and to use your voice and make change, because that's the only way it's going to happen.
How much time do we have, Carol? Okay. Okay. Okay, so if I can, then can I take one more minute too? I want to ask then, did you want to say something before? Because it looks like you were reaching for the microphone.
Give it to the mayor.
No, if you want to go ahead and make a comment, and then I'll go after that.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what you said, Carmen. It's just really crazy when we talk about new solutions and new ideas to problems that are persistent, right? Because at the end of the day, all of these problems that we have right now are issues of policy. You know, it's what we didn't do in the past or what we avoided in the past that's now kicking us in the teeth. So we could all run to that wall right now and try to knock it down, but we clearly see that door off to the right-hand side that has an exit. So are we all going to keep running to that wall, or are we going to run to that door that has a little bit of ease to it? You tell me. But a little bit in a past life, I used to be the student body president at the community college I went to, Contra Costa College, and simultaneously I sat on the state's community college board. Governor Brown appointed me back in the day. And so what would I do? I would do on a pretty regular basis is go up and down California hearing about problems. And so one of the things that we did at Contra Costa is we realized that we had to meet people where they are in terms of food insecurity, because that was the number one reason why people weren't showing up to class. So what we did was we started it was under my presidency, we started the free breakfast, school supplies, and bus pass program. In addition to that, we partnered with this community group called Fresh, and they brought produce every single Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, not at 6 o'clock p.m. when nobody's on campus, but from 8 to 3 p.m. when the heart of campus is there. So again, I think you have to meet people where they are, and that's what that cross-collaboration truly is. I mean, you highlighted it, right? I can't tell you how many times I've been told on my council, well, historically, we haven't worked with our congressman. Historically, we haven't worked with our assemblywoman. And I said, well, that's crazy. She's coming out here tomorrow because I invited her 2 weeks ago, and that's all about that partnerships. It really also, too, is the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? If you're not trying to bring up some of these issues in your community, no one's going to ever know about them, and no one's going to fight for you if you're not willing to fight for yourself.
Great, thank you so much. So as we wrap up here, I heard a couple of things that would be really important as we resolve to solve like some of the challenges that we were faced with as part of this topic. I heard elected officials and who you vote for is really important. I also heard that we need to use a multi-generational approach to how we address the situations that are happening in our community. I also heard policy and advocacy is also really important, because the policies that are happening, some of which, of course, our elected officials are, of course, very involved in that, but there's also a role to play for all of us in understanding what the policies are that are being voted on. I have a whole nother story on that, but Carol's standing there, so I won't go into my whole story related to that. But it is incredibly important that we pay attention to what's happening at the Capitol, locally within your own state, what's happening at city council within your own city, and also what's happening federally in terms of what's happening at the national capital as well. Because there are decisions that are being made, whether you like them or not. These decisions are being made that will affect your life every single day. And there's so much going on, you may or may not be able to keep up with all of the things, but that's why you have elected officials. You elected them, or maybe you didn't, but they're still supposed to represent you, and they have a responsibility to answer to you if you have questions. So we have to just be a little bit more savvy about understanding that we have a responsibility as well in making sure that things are happening when we start talking about policy and advocacy that are in your best interests. And then what we also learned too is that there are things that are happening today that are really effective. So how do we make sure that those things are connected to like the funding that will allow them to grow and exponentially be able to serve communities not only here in Colorado but across the country? So there's some work I think we all have to do based upon everything that we heard today. And so as we wrap up, I think we have all a responsibility, and it is incredibly important for us to be engaged in the conversation, not only from listening in our seats today, but also going back and saying, what can I do to address some of the issues that we have here? Because I would argue that all of us can do something that would impact the solutions that you heard today and the solutions that are on the horizon from some of the amazing young people who are now starting to really get engaged and want to see something different happen. How do we support them? How do we make sure that we're electing the right people? How do we make sure that we are involved in understanding what's happening from a policy perspective, and that we can, as a collective group, ensure that our communities are thriving because we are working together to solve some of these critical issues. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kerr. I had more questions, though, but we will leave it. We'll leave it alone, and we'll turn it over to Carol. Let's go ahead and give a round of applause for all of our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much for being here today. They were absolutely fantastic. Carol.